Hello and welcome. You are listening to The Recovered Republican, the show where we break out of the echo chambers and challenge the narratives that keep us stuck and talk honestly about the future we're building together. Before we dive in, make sure you hit that subscribe so you never miss a conversation. If you want to support the work we're doing here and keep the conversations going, these deep, necessary, and sometimes uncomfortable, but always honest discussions, you can always head over to Substack and become a supporter. All right, let's get into it. I'm your host, Brianna, and today I am joined by David J. Ziemba, a true jack of all trades for democracy. He's a career problem solver in policy, campaign, and law, and one of those rare people who can translate the complex machinery of our system into something that the rest of us can understand and actually use to make change. So help me welcome David J. Ziemba to the stage. Hello, how are you today?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm fantastic. Thank you for joining me. I know it's a lovely day outside today, so I'm sorry to keep you inside.
No worries.
Yeah, but before we get into the meat and potatoes of what we're here for, tell people who you are and just like what work you've done and experiences that you've had working for the party.
Oh, gosh. I like the definition that you used that I'm a jack of all trades. I was in a meeting a couple of months ago with some folks in D.C. and they asked me what I do and what my expertise is. And I said, well, I'm a little bit of the Democratic Party's Swiss Army knife. And I think that's the easiest way I can explain what I've done in the last 30 some odd years involved in politics. I started off volunteering for a family friend, Congressman Visklosky, up in the Congressional District 1 up in Northwest Indiana. It's where I'm originally from. I started that about, when I was 12. He grew up across the alley from my dad in Gary, Indiana. And he was the reason that I started in politics. When I was about 8 years old, my father took the family to D.C. and we met with Pete. And he let me and my brother go to the floor of the House. And I think the statute of limitations is now passed since Pete is no longer a congressman, but he let me vote for him. And I said, well, this is what I want to do for the rest of my life. And that was, I said, oh, okay, this is kind of cool. And that's kind of where it all started. So I started knocking doors for him when I was 12, 13 years old. And then, gosh, it just kind of
that helped gain some votes. Cute kids knocking doors.
I got really into working in the community and became a little bit of a community organizer in my teenage years. And then that work translated into me being identified by Governor O'Bannon, and he appointed me to a chair of a position within his administration at the age of 17. I was the chair of the Indiana Youth Commission for Service and Leadership. It was a commission that he created in order to spur involvement for youth in their community to do community service. So there I was at 17 years old, signing checks on behalf of the Indiana government to other kids who were doing community service projects in their communities. I don't know why you thought that, Governor O'Bannon thought that was a trustworthy position for me, but good Lord knows that looking back on it, I probably wouldn't have chosen me at 17, but it is what it is. And it was a really neat experience. I then got a full ride to DePaul because of all of that experience. And my junior and senior year, I served as Mayor Michael's assistant mayor / deputy mayor for 2 years, my junior and senior year. Which was still to this day the best job in government I've ever had.
As a DePaul grad myself, how did you manage that?
Well, it was almost a full-time job. I was required to work about 30 hours a week. It was part of a program that the university sponsors, and you have to work about 30 hours a week in the community in DePaul at Greencastle. And so it was part of that program that I was able to do the job. At the same time I was doing that and a full-time student, I was also serving on the International Board of Trustees for Kiwanis International. And I was also the full-time director of the pep band at school. So I was incredibly busy, but it's just kind of how my life works. I don't feel like I'm doing ever enough for other people. And so it was very, very fulfilling. Again, it was probably the best job in politics I've ever had, serving Greencastle. When I graduated, I moved out to Washington, D.C., and I got a job with Senator Evan Bayh, and I was there for about 4.5 to 5 years. And I did pretty much everything under the sun. I read everybody's mail. I was the correspondence manager for a couple of years. Everybody takes turns of making sure that the senator gets to all his appointments and is prepped. So I did that for a while. I was a legislative correspondent for a while. I helped Dan Pfeiffer out in the press shop when he was working for Evan, which is why I know Dan. And, it just all was, everybody all kind of just pitched in, and whatever you could do, you could do. At the end of that time, 4.5, 5 years, I was ready to move on. So I started lobbying on behalf of the American steel industry. Did that for about 1.5 2 years, and then went to law school. And while I was in Evan's office, because he didn't really have that much challenge in elections, when that happens, when you work on the Hill, you get loaned out to either the Democratic Senatorial Campaign Committee or its house adjacent to the Democratic Congressional Committee. And so what happens is you resign your position, and then you go across the street and you sign a "I'm hired" letter. And then when the campaigns end, you flip that process because you can't do both at the same time. And so through that, I was able to work on Joe Donnelly's initial congressional campaign and met Joe that way, and some other great races around the country. And so I got a lot of campaign experience doing that as a very young staffer in my 20s. Went to law school in Ohio, and when I graduated, and then Congressman Donnelly called me up and said, "Hey, I need your help in Indianapolis. I'm running for Senate. I need your help." And I said, "Sure, let me take the bar exam, and then I'll head over." And I did that, and we won that race in 12. And then that's how I met Speaker John Gregg, because he was the governor candidate running on the ticket that year. And then in 16, I was a senior advisor with Speaker Gregg on his second attempt to become governor. And unfortunately, we did everything right, but unfortunately, the numbers just didn't work out. Governor Pence decided to hitch his rope to the president, the current president, which either could have worked well or worked not, depending on how you view that situation. And so he hightailed it out of here, and then Governor Holcomb took over the campaign, and we lost. Then I just continued to kind of just rummage around. Whomever needed help, whoever calls me, I'm more than happy to help them out. And that led to my being named or called or asked to be President Biden's coordinator for the state of his campaign in 2020. And then through that, because it was a pandemic, we had to learn about new ways to run a campaign. I mean, it was completely odd. And so I worked with the Democratic National Committee as well as the presidential election campaign to figure out how exactly we were going to door knock and phone call in the middle of a pandemic. And we had to create basically a brand new revolutionary campaign. That was not easy. We had to coordinate everybody from all over the country in new ways. And it was kind of cool to be on that breaking edge stuff. And we won the election, obviously, in 20, which was awesome. And I stayed kind of involved in those proceedings and that stuff until probably 2024-ish. I served in the same role for Vice President Harris when she ran and took over that campaign. But in 24, I was also serving as the pro bono general counsel for the Democrats' governor candidate, which was Jennifer McCormick at the time. So those are the big stuff that I've done. I'll leave out all the little things in between, just because, whoever calls me and says, "Hey, I need your advice" or "I need help," I'm more than happy to do that. I commonly tell people when they say, "Well, how much do I owe you?" I say, I haven't gotten paid by the Democratic Party in like 15 years. So it's all for free. And it's just because people need help.
Yeah, I think that it sounds like you really are a jack of all trades and just kind of go where you're needed. And it's a big help. More people need to kind of help out where they can. And I think you're a good example of that. But tell me a little bit about, we just had a legislative session finish up here in 2026. And we know that with a Republican supermajority. We can't win them all, but we actually did have some wins in this legislative session. Can you speak a little bit about that?
Sure. And I think we'll just start with the big one, right? I mean, everybody knows that we defeated the redistricting efforts that was led by the president in the White House and his administration. And I think that, a lot has been said about it, probably here and elsewhere. It doesn't need to be rehashed, but the caveat that I always take away is, we've heard a lot of candidates over the last, probably 5 to 6 years talk about how Indiana is not really a red or blue state. It's more of a purplish state. And while I don't think it's that simple, I think the better way to look at it is people in Indiana and Hoosiers in general can smell something wrong really quickly. And if you're not genuine and you're not on the level, folks in Indiana are going to find out real quick, and they're not going to play around. If the proposal doesn't seem fair and it doesn't seem quite right, they're going to figure it out really quickly. And it depends on how you utilize that. And so I was very proud of the fact that a lot of people came together, a lot of organizations came together, and they settled on the message of this is, you're changing the rules in the middle of the game. The statute says you can only redistrict every 10 years after a census. That's the rule. You did this a couple of years ago. You said it was the best maps in the United States that we redrew. Nothing has changed in the past 4 years. So why are we doing this? You're only doing this for political reasons, and that's not how Hoosiers like it. That's not what we do. And because of that message just kept pounding over and over again, a lot of organizations came together, and we were able to do a really great grassroots organizing effort. And when you are able to have a solid message that is true, that people resonate with, and you actually talked to people on their level and meet them where they are, they're going to come out for you. And I think that's the message that I've always kind of carried on through all the campaigns that I've ever advised, especially with grassroots efforts. If you can talk to them like normal human beings and explain to them exactly why you think the way that you think, they're most likely going to believe you as long as it's reasonable. And you just have to get out there and do the job. A lot of times I see campaigns in Indiana, they don't do the hard work of reaching out to their voters. And they worry about fundraising more than they worry about grassroots efforts. They worry about yard signs more than they worry about phone calls or phone banks or door knocks. And that's a fundamental problem that I see over and over and over again. So the one piece of advice and the one takeaway that I get from the redistricting effort and the win there was meet your voters where you are and make sure you talk to them. Give them a reason to believe in you. And if you do that, you're more likely than not going to win something, whatever you're trying to win. And so we did that, and it was an incredibly proud moment, I think, for the entire state. We were able to say, no, we don't like cheaters. We don't like to cheat. We like things fair. And that's how Indiana is. And so you just got to base yourself on that. So that's the redistricting effort. That's the only thing I'll say about it, unless you have questions. But yeah, that's the big, huge win. And I think there's a lot of good takeaways from it that we just have to implement going forward.
Absolutely. And one of those takeaways that I wanted to mention and kind of bring up is when this started, I think a lot of us thought that our legislature was not going to listen to us. And when they did, it was very surprising. But the way we got them to listen is we basically just called the shit out of them.
Yeah. You just got to tell it. Like I said, I think the one thing that I keep taking away from all the campaigns that I've helped in and all the ones that I've organized in and are advised is if you can meet the people where they are and talk to them straight to their face and tell them exactly what you think and why you think that way, they're going to either believe you or they're not. And if you have a good enough message and you have a good reason why, you're going to be fine. And you most likely will win that race. Don't try to be somebody you're not. Don't try to make something that's not. Call it out for what it is. And then you'll either win or lose, but at least you did what you were supposed to do and you did it the right way.
Absolutely. Do you think that the redistricting helped kind of motivate people to be more involved in politics in Indiana?
I hope so. We're going to find out in a couple of months. I know that a lot of candidates that I'm talking to are starting to get their ground game going. The primary is around the corner. So that work is about to start. And one of the things that I kept talking about through the redistricting efforts and all the organizations that were doing that work was, this is great for now, but what happens in a couple of months? We have to make sure that we don't lose momentum, because this is the exact work that needs to be done. Like I said, going to speeches, great. Having rallies, awesome. Doing protests, that's great for you. I'm super happy. If that fulfills your bucket, great, do it. The problem is what happens after those big events, because that's awesome. It makes you feel great. It makes great impact. It's wonderful for news stories, but the real work is not on TV. The real work is making phone calls every night, 100 phone calls a day, calling people, making sure that they know who you are and what you stand for and why you're running. And that's how you win elections. So hopefully people, don't quit.
Yeah, and we'll talk more about that later in the show about how people can get involved, because I know that's what people want to know. But let's get back to the legislative wins, because we have more. We have the legislative win of SB 236 that targeted abortion medication. Can you speak a little bit what happened there?
Yeah, obviously this is a big problem that has been sweeping across the nation because of the Supreme Court's decision a few years ago. One of the things you go to law school when you learn about stare decisis is that the reason that it's there and the reason the Supreme Court is there is to make sure that on the big controversial stuff, we're not going state by state. It makes everything weird and disjuncted. It's not great for the law. It's not great for the rule of law. It's not great for the Constitution. Unfortunately, what we have seen over the last probably 10 years in the Supreme Court under Chief Justice Roberts' leadership is that rule just doesn't seem to apply anymore. And the greatest example of that is obviously abortion. It's unfortunate that, the Supreme Court did what it did. And now we're all having to deal with the side effects and the consequences of that decision. And not only just the bare minimum of abortion, but also the other things that are coming into play that could be overturned based on that decision. There's a lot of people who are afraid for who they are and what they believe and who they're married to and more and more and more, right? So a lot of rights are coming into question and people are very afraid. But we've got to deal with the consequences of the abortion decision. And because we live in a conservative state, we have to deal with the General Assembly who keeps pushing more controversial issues that are unconstitutional at best. And one of them being this legislation that was targeting abortion medication, right? We all know that going to a clinic and having a medical procedure is one way to end pregnancy, but we also have other ways to do that. They're non-procedural, that you can go and order medication. And of course, that's the next attack that most states are seeing across the country. We're not the only one that's been dealing with this, but we were lucky enough to have some clear head and clear minds in the state legislature that said that's not what we want to do at this time. And we defeated SB 236. And it's a huge win. It's a huge win for women across the state of Indiana. And now we have to make sure that we build upon that and try to push back on what's already happened.
Absolutely. And I think that you make a great point, and it was just a small point, but it is a big win, and building upon that is important because I think people get frustrated with politics because they don't understand that it is steps that you have to take to right the ship. It's not like we're going to go from one of the strictest abortion bans in the nation to getting that right to choose back. So we
Correct.
do have to make incremental steps. So this is a big win. You're right. I just wanted to highlight that a little more, I guess. So, but there are so many wins actually that I was very surprised about. Another legislative win that I want to talk about is the SB 182, the anti-transgender defining policy definitions and policy or policing. Sorry, I can trip over my word.
Yeah, the General Assembly and some folks there, again, because we live in a conservative state, we have a lot of folks who are, they don't have the right education. They haven't been brought up in communities and they haven't experienced relationships with folks in our LGBTQ plus community. And so because of that, they seem to think that they can target these folks and win some cheap votes in their community by doing such. It's clearly not okay. It's clearly inhumane, but it is what it is. But SB 182 attempted to define gender based solely on the reproductive anatomy that you're born with and that's on your birth certificates. It would have required schools, moreover, to enforce that male-female bathroom only thing, not only in the bathrooms, but also in the locker rooms. And then equally, if you went to college, in dorm rooms. So it would have shut down a lot of individual expression, as well as the fact that people are who they are. A conversation that I have a lot of times with folks who are, again, in this interesting dynamic where they don't know a lot of folks who are LGBTQIA. They don't understand that they'll just say to you, for instance, well, I just want them to be who they are. And you're like, but that's what we're trying to do. They are who they are from the time that they're born. And that is who they are, God-given. And by placing them in a situation in which, because you've already labeled them at birth with this specificity or this type of gender based on their genitals, that doesn't mean that's who they are, because God has made them who they are, not what is on a piece of paper. And so the more you can talk to people about that, I think the better you have at explaining to them why folks on our side of the aisle are so adamant against these kinds of pieces of legislation. And that's how you need to talk to folks, because you just need to say, you know, that's fine that you believe that way, but that's a piece of paper. That's a government piece of paper. That's not what God made them. If they feel like they are of this gender or that gender, but their piece of paper says something differently, it's just a piece of paper. They are who they are, and you just need to accept them because that's who God made them. And once you kind of talk to them in that way, they kind of twerk their head a little bit and they go, oh, that's a really interesting way of putting that. I've never thought about it that way. So we were lucky enough to beat that piece of legislation. It's good. Again, it's a small win, but it's a huge win for that community because there is a lot of fear, again, based on that decision in Dobbs a couple of years ago. We don't know where that's going to go in the next few years. And there's going to be a lot of legislation that's going to be thought of and brought up in the state house, not only here in Indiana, but across the country. And we just need to continue to talk to people in a way that they understand and meet them where they are so that they understand what this community is going through and why these are harmful pieces of legislation.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, it's a step in the right direction, especially when, like, I mean, we've passed like no trans athletes in our sports 3 times or something crazy. And it's like, so this is a big win for Indiana. It's showing that hopefully some people are starting to realize that maybe it's not something that we should be legislating all the time, especially it's less than 1% of the population who are identifying as trans at this point. And just, I saw somebody say that one of the arguments is that they're afraid that men are going to become trans women to then attack women in the bathroom. And I'm like, so you think that the only reason that someone who wants to attack women is not going into the women's bathroom because it's a women's bathroom and they're a man, but them becoming trans is going to somehow get over that little hurdle, so now they're going into the bathroom to attack people? I'm pretty sure if somebody has that intent, they're not going to care that you're in the women's bathroom and they're not a woman. No. It's just a little silly to me.
It's a little bit of a solution looking for a problem rather than the problem looking for a solution.
Right, exactly. Well, I'm so happy about that one, but we still have good ones to talk about. So let's talk about early voting. There was a bill that they wanted to cut early voting, right?
Yes, they did. Yeah, that's HB 1389. They wanted to reduce the amount of days that you could early vote from about a month to 16 days. I think it's no secret based on Destiny Wells's campaign, as well as everybody else talking about this problem, that Indiana has one of the lowest voter turnouts in the entire country. It's not great. And so, again, it's a problem looking for a solution rather than the solution looking for a problem. Like, it's just odd, right? Why are we going to continue to restrict your ability to get people to the polls? It doesn't make any sense whatsoever. And luckily we had, that was, I think, defeated actually in the state Senate. And so our state senators, including J.D. Ford, made very impassioned speeches about the fact that this was just not necessary for any reason whatsoever. And in fact, if you're going to do anything, we need to expand voting, early voting, rather than closing it down, because we just don't have enough people who are participating. And, I could speculate, and we all could speculate about what is more likely what's going on and why they're trying to shut down even more voting. But again, that's speculation. We won't go into their intent. But, it just doesn't make any sense why we're going to continue to push people not to vote in this state when we already have a problem with people voting in the first place.
Absolutely. We're always like 49th or 50th in voter turnout. A lot of that's why Rock the Vote's here a lot and trying to get people to turn out more. On non-presidential primary years, I've looked at it before, and it's like we've had abysmal turnout as low as 12%. It's just we need people out voting. You're so right. So that's a huge win. I am so glad that defeated. When this bill was introduced, I was just like, why?
Yes,
why?
No. And the odd thing about this is that this is the first time in a very, very long time that the Indiana House and Senate caucuses for the Democratic Party have gotten almost every open seat filled with candidates.
I know.
Probably 40 or 50 years. And so, I am now the chair of the Perry Township, which is the southern middle section of Marion County. I'm now the chair of that township Democratic club. And we worked really, really hard to find people to fill our slate of candidates. And one of the things that we see over and over again, especially in Indiana, and this goes across the country in fairly red states, is that it's just hard to find people who are going to run on ballots as Democrats. But it's essential to have somebody on the list for the ballot for almost everything that you can think of, because if you don't, that is a confirmation bias, right? People are going to not see a name being challenged. They're not going to see a Democrat on the ballot, and they're going to think, well, they must think the Republicans are right. There's nobody challenging them. So why should I pay attention to what the Democrats do or say or what they believe in, or even research who these people are or what their stances are? If we can get more people on the ballot, especially for local races, township trustees, constables, even state house candidates and Senate candidates in the House, those races are equally as important as your federal races, because they convince people that we actually are worthy of being considered for your vote. And it's just visuals. And so it takes time to do that. So on top of defeating this thing, we've done a really good job as a party this year, finding a lot of people to run for offices. And I'm very proud of the Democrats in Indiana for doing so this year.
Absolutely. Yeah, it is really cool. I forget if it's the Senate or the House that there's somebody in every slot, but it's really cool. But we have some other wins that I want to go through them really quickly. It sounds like we defeated the 10 Commandments in public schools, which is
for now. There was a in the 5th district down in Texas, it was just decided by the 5th District Court of Appeals that a similar Texas law actually has been found to be constitutional. So that's going to probably come back in the next session for sure, depending on what the Supreme Court does. And so we'll have to go back to the drawing board and have another conversation with our Republican colleagues about what this actually means. It was an interesting way of putting it forward, because the bill that was proposed in the State House would have listed the 10 Commandments as a historical document rather than a religious document, which would have cleared the First Amendment hurdle, or at least claimed to have cleared the First Amendment hurdle. So it's an inventive way of getting around some constitutional law, but we'll see how that legal thing figures itself out in Texas as it goes up the food chain in the federal courts.
We'll have to keep an eye on that for sure. But it was good that we defeated it this time. And then there was this really wonky one that I'm sure you have more insight at being an attorney. The HJR one, the impeachment of judges and prosecutors. I assumed this was an attack on Ryan Mears.
I don't know. It came from my own House district representative, Mr. Ireland, who is also an attorney. It would have been an amendment to the Indiana Constitution, and it would have to have not only passed this session, but the next session as well. in both houses in order to get on a referendum for our ballots. And it would have made some rules about trying to impeach judges and prosecutors who they felt weren't doing their job. Oddly enough, here in Marion County, we can't elect judges. The state General Assembly took that power away from us. It has also taken that power away from most of the Democratic-centric counties in the state of Indiana. There's 4 or 5 counties that can't elect their judges out of 92. Lake County can't do it. We can't do it. St. Joe can't do it. Monroe County can't do it. And then some judges in Allen County. So there's, depending on how you count it, 5 or 6 counties. And those are the most Democratic counties in the state. And we can't elect our judges for some strange reason. So, if you really, again, it's the solution looking for a problem. If you really want to solve the problem, Mr. Ireland, my argument would be, why not just allow us to elect our judges and have a full-fledged campaign where people get to choose what they like and don't like. And if they have a problem with the judges and how they're doing their job, maybe they don't win a re-election instead of giving that power to impeach to the state house for some strange, odd reason. At least that's for the judges. As far as the prosecutors goes, we were lucky enough to see that the Indiana Prosecuting Attorneys Council, which is IPAC, they're a collection, they're basically the lobbying group for all of the prosecutors in the state of Indiana, all 92 counties. They're represented by this one specific entity. And they came quickly out and opposed HJR1, and they denounced it. I will leave you to your Google searches because the quotes that the IPAC and the leaders of IPAC said about HJR1 are worth a read. And so HJR1 didn't go very far. I think it's a solution looking for a problem, and I'm not really sure where Mr. Ireland's head was there. But he tried. That's his job as a legislator, is to propose stuff. And people told him pretty much summarily, no.
Yeah. Someone did ask in the comments about how they elect judges here in those counties. And I know that it's based on the governor chooses, correct?
Kind of at the end of the process. So in each one of those counties, there's a judicial selection committee. That's their actual title. And they are made up of local attorneys in the local bar associations. They are appointed by both the Republican and the Democratic parties that are in those counties as well. And then there's some other folks that are on those committees, including, generally speaking, somebody either from the Court of Appeals or from the state Supreme Court itself. They will open those positions up when they become open for applications. Applications go to the Judicial Selection Committee. I don't know if all of the counties do it this way, but here in Marion County, if you apply, pretty much you get an interview in front of the committee. After the interview, they select 3 people to go on to the governor's office, and they have full bios and the whole 9 yards, and notes and background checks and the whole 9 yards. Then you have to go meet with the governor, and he asks you a whole bunch of questions, and then the governor gets to select at the end of that process. There was a bill this year that changed how those people get selected for that committee. And so that's going to be interesting to see how that goes. And I think instead of 3 people now, I think there's 5 people nominated from the Judicial Selection Committee that goes to the governor's office. So it's a really wonky way of doing it. And again, you get people who are, they're wonderful human beings. They're wonderful attorneys, obviously, because they get nominated by other attorneys to the governor's office. But it's just, again, it's a solution looking for a problem. If you really wanted to allow people to have their say, just let them elect their judges like every other county in the state of Indiana. It just doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, it's just weird that every other county gets to elect their judges except the Palouse counties. And it's like, it's obviously, there's a reason for that. So I would like to see that change personally, but I know that's asking a lot probably. Yeah. But we do still have some legislative wins. Tell me about SB 11 HB 1119 expanding.
This one was hugely controversial. It was a thought process, again, from our colleagues across the aisle who believed that maybe we should allow folks to have a firing squad for an execution by the Department of Corrections. It is not something that is common in the United States, but there are several states that also have firing squads. Generally speaking, in those states that have adopted this execution method, they allow the person who has been sentenced to execution to choose whether or not they want a firing squad or a different approved way of being executed. That was not included in this bill. So it would have just been, this is how it's done. The impetus was a couple of years ago. Governor Holcomb finally found the money and the drugs to start executing individuals who are put on death row here in the state of Indiana. And whether or not you agree with the death penalty or not, this is what happened. The problem is that it costs a lot of money. And it costs about $500,000 for one execution to purchase the approved medication in order to get that done. And so Republicans, being the fiscally conservative people that they are, went, well, we could spend a couple of dollars on some bullets, or we could spend $500,000 on the drugs. And this seems way cheaper and way faster. So why don't we at least consider it? I think that was the impetus and the thought process behind it. Of course, it's completely inhumane. And we were lucky enough that people on both aisles thought the idea was not worthy of being considered. And it was not even considered in the full House or the Senate.
Well, that one was very shocking when I read it. And I was just like, what are people even thinking? I don't even know.
The caveat is it costs the same amount of money for life without parole as it does by putting someone to death in this state. So you're not saving any money either way. And so, again, the question is, do we really want to...
Yeah, it's like you end up spending more because the medication is the same amount than it is to keep them in prison without parole for the rest of their life. I remember learning this in high school and being like, why would anyone ever support the death penalty then? It doesn't make logical sense.
Yeah. Pope Leo just actually talked about this in a sermon and the Catholic belief that all life is sacred and why are we putting people to death? So he included that in his sermon. So I would urge our Republican colleagues to maybe go look at Pope Leo's sermon.
Right. I think there's a lot of our legislature that needs to go to church again because it doesn't seem like they're going. Anyway, but we did win some electric utility affordability. Tell us about that.
Yeah, the HEA, what was it, 10002, I think it was, that establishes a new low-income energy assistance program. And so that's really great for folks in our big cities. Clearly, energy prices are skyrocketing, and because of our current president's, let's just say excursion into the Middle East, things are not going to go any cheaper anytime soon. It's going to continue to go up, or if not stay at the same prices throughout the summer. And so that's going to be a huge win for Democrats as well as everybody else in the state of Indiana as they see their utility bills continue to skyrocket. That's bad. We don't want the energy prices to go, but we know that's going to happen. So how do we fix the problem or lessen the burden on Hoosiers? So this bill helps with that. And then the other thing that the bill did, which is actually really cool, is that it prohibits shutoffs during heat index days. Growing up in Northwest Indiana, we got Chicago news all the time. And so in the summer, when it got really hot, we would always get news saying, hey, it's going to be heat index day tomorrow. It's going to be heat index over 120 or 110 or whatever it is. Everybody's in a high rise. Go check on your road, folks, because they may not survive the next day. And so this is a bill that solves that problem. You're not going to have your energy shut off in the middle of a heat index day. So you're going to be able to have some sort of cooling. Hopefully you have an air conditioner. If not, then we'll be able to help you out with that as well. And the energy companies can't shut it off just because they feel like it or because you're overdue on your bill or whatever may be the problem. But it's going to save lives, and that's great.
Absolutely will save lives. So that is a great one for Hoosiers, and I'm glad to see that one pass. And then the last win, we have SEA 6, the extension of water services. What is that one about?
This was a huge thing in Dr. McCormick's campaign a couple of years ago. Where she was really worried about water conservation. If you look at the stats here in Indiana, our conservation numbers are horrid. They're absolutely atrocious. We are taking away the wetlands, and it's destroying farmlands, and it's making farming in Indiana incredibly difficult. And so what this bill does is that it's going to require a public water utility to provide additional outreach before they condemn land in these wetland areas, and then the government can take them over. I don't know if it's going to have any influence over the data centers, because the data centers obviously use a massive amount of water. But I can see where this bill may actually have some influence of where these data centers eventually end up, if they are coming here and they're passed by local governments, because they take a lot of water, and the places that they're looking at putting these data centers are, generally speaking, in some sort of wetland area, or have access to wetlands, or near farmland that needs access to these waters. And so that may actually help, stymie some of the negative effects of these data centers in the long run. So that's good. So it's going to have some interesting effects, but essentially what it does is it prevents the public water utilities from cutting off access to these wetlands, and then before they condemn them so they can take them over, if they're going to have some sort of hearing process and due process for the citizens to talk about it and protest anything happening to these areas.
I'm glad to hear someone is worried about our water conservation, because you're right, it is very atrocious, and we need someone to start having accountability and like looking at that and tracking it. But we do have some losses. Being in a Republican supermajority, we're going to. So let's talk about those. Legislative losses, SEA 12. Go ahead.
I mean, that one just bans us from ranked choice voting. It's kind of the boogeyman within the Republican Party right now. They don't like ranked choice voting. A really great example of what is going on is you could look at Alaska's Senate race right now. They have ranked choice voting, and it's very interesting when you look at the U.S. Senate race out there, which I'm sure we'll talk about in a little bit. But it could happen that because of ranked choice voting, the Democrat gets elected to the United States Senate because of ranked choice voting. Maine also has ranked choice voting. They're one of the first states to put it into play. I knew the Secretary of State who actually helped do that, and he just loves it. He thinks it's the greatest thing since sliced bread, because it allows people to vote for whoever they want, regardless of the party, and it actually increases participation in elections because they have more choices, as we talked about earlier. And so I don't know what their thought process is. We can speculate why they don't like ranked choice voting. It's a very strong presumption, but I'll let them talk for themselves. And I'll just say, unfortunately, we can't do it here in Indiana.
Yeah, that's unfortunate, because I do think that would have helped with voter turnout. But let's talk about the judicial losses. HEA 1033. Yeah,
this is just a quick recap of the judicial selection process that we talked about previously. Again, they made some subtle changes to how people get nominated and selected for the Judicial Selection Committee. They gave the governor a little bit more influence, and what they did was they took away the local bar association's ability to appoint people to the committee, and instead put a specific pick for the governor's office, as well as, if I remember correctly, the chief judge of the local county. So whomever that is gets to appoint people, and the governor gets to appoint people, rather than them coming from the specific bar associations. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. We don't know yet if it's going to change anything that much, because lawyers know lawyers, and we know who's qualified to do the job, and so we tend to, regardless of who selects them, it generally turns out to be the same people. But we don't know. It could be disastrous. It could not be disastrous. We're going to have to see how that plays out in the next couple of years.
Okay. Then we have some criminal losses, it looks like. We have that on November, the increased risk that you're not going to be able to get bail.
Yeah.
Non-capital offenses.
This is a playback over the last couple of years. There's been probably 4 or 5 years now, where there's been a national conversation about bail and no bail, cash bail versus regular bail. Can you make surety bonds? How does that work? Again, it's a little bit of a boogeyman situation. It doesn't really happen that much. The fear that is being promulgated by news sources that are more conservative than not seem to think that crime is rampant, and downtowns are horrible and everybody's dying, and which doesn't happen, right? We just hosted the Final Four here in Indianapolis. It was fine. There were millions of people who came to town. Nobody complained about. If you go on Twitter and search, NCAA Final Four, everybody raved at how safe and wonderful and beautiful in downtown Indianapolis was. And regardless of how many people came here and said that, people in the General Assembly are still going to say, no, it's a horrible place to live, and I can't believe how dangerous it is downtown. Okay. You just can't convince people of facts sometimes or what they're seeing in their face. Okay, fine. What this is going to do, it's a constitutional amendment we're all going to get to vote on. So just like Mr. Ireland's proposal about impeaching folk, if it's a constitutional amendment, we all get to vote on it in November. So that helps with voter turnout. So we're going to be able to say, hey, if you don't like this, you should go and vote in the general election because this is going to be a thing on our Constitution. If you don't like it, you better go out and vote, regardless of who's on the ballot. And even though we're not voting for president, we're not voting for senators, this is a big deal. So it's going to increase our ability to get voter turnout, which is good. The problem, of course, is it a problem that needs solving? I don't really know. What it does is it does give judges a little bit more power in determining whether or not they're going to give violent offenders bail. And they're going to give the bill actually gives them factors of what they're going to be able to use in that determination. So it's not the boogeyman everybody probably is going to think it is, like, oh, you're taking away cash bail. It doesn't do that. It only does that for particular individuals who fit a very specific set of factors. And I would encourage everybody to go look at this one because it's very specific and you need to kind of educate yourself on what those factors are and then determine for yourself what you think of those factors.
Okay. So so there's some more criminal losses, the one about no urban camping, basically, and allowing the governor to deploy the Indiana National Guard as military police force with civilian enforcement powers.
Yeah, let's talk about the military enforcement one first, because I think it's a little less controversial than the camping one. Clearly, we've seen in national news what the president likes to do with people's National Guards. And that's problematic. Especially since he's going to be in office for the next couple of years. The bill did get passed, and essentially what it does is it gives extra powers to the governor when he deploys the National Guard. Now, as I've explained to other people about this, you can look at it twofold, right? You can look at it like the boogeyman and say, oh my gosh, I can't believe that the governor is going to be able to give them police powers and they're going to be able to arrest people. And yes, that is true. It's something to be afraid of. But how many times in the last 40 or 50 years does anybody remember the Indiana National Guard being deployed and having to do some sort of police work? It's never happened, right? So the likelihood that this is going to happen is pretty rare, first of all. And second of all, it's an interesting way of taking some power away from the president of the United States from taking over the Indiana National Guard and allowing them to do police work on his behalf. This way, if the president calls the governor and says, hey, I'm going to take over your National Guard and use them as police forces, our governor can then say, if he feels like it, if he actually wants to stand up to the president, but that's a whole different question, hey, I'll take care of it. And then he gets to control these actions and how much power they actually have rather than giving it to the guy in D.C. who has no idea what's going on in Indiana or not. So it can be a win or a loss. We're not really sure how that's going to play out. It's something to be afraid of and something to keep watch on. But in the situation in the world that we currently live in, ultimately, it may not be as bad as people think it is. So that's that one. The second one, of course, is the camping issue. This is massively controversial because the big headline everywhere is, hey, you're criminalizing homelessness. Well, yes, in a sense, that's exactly what they're doing. But the language of the statute is written as such in which that's the last resort that's going to happen, okay? There are actually processes that need to happen before they can ever put cuffs on anyone who's sleeping on public land. And it's pretty stringent. So they have to, first of all, figure out whether or not these folks are suffering from some sort of mental health crises. And if they are, and they can take them to a facility, then they have to do that. That's option number one. If they're not suffering from mental health issues and they don't have a bed somewhere, okay, so there's two caveats to that, then they have to figure out if the county has space somewhere in the county for them to sleep inside, okay? So that's caveat number two. So it's a long list before you finally get to, We don't have anything we can't put these people anywhere. They can't stay here because of whatever reason it's getting dangerous in the camp or something is going on, then maybe we'll arrest them for a C misdemeanor. So that's really bad. We don't want homeless people to be given a C misdemeanor for no reason whatsoever, just because they are who they are and they're sleeping where they're sleeping. That's bad. But you got to remember, police people don't ultimately charge crimes. That's up to the local prosecutor's office. So here in Marion County, where you and I live, we have Prosecutor Mears. I don't know if he would ever charge someone for sleeping outside. That I cannot even speculate whether or not that's a position he can take or discuss if he wants to. I highly doubt, knowing Mr. Mears, that he would do that. But again, that would be his choice and his office's choice. And it would be up to each prosecutor in each of the 92 counties to make that choice. So ultimately, maybe they stay a night in the local jail, get dry, get warm, and maybe it's more humanitarian than you think it is. But again, we don't want to criminalize homelessness. So there's that fine line. It also kind of puts the onus back on the local government. Here in Marion County, the homelessness has been a topic of conversation since I've lived here for the past 15 years. And still to this day, we don't really have a facility that is government run for individuals who have homeless issues. It's something that the city county council has talked about extensively. They've passed resolutions about it, but unfortunately nothing has happened in order to spur them to do something and build an actual facility to this point. And so maybe this kicks them into gear a little bit. Maybe that's the solution that happens because of this bill. Regardless of such, we treat it as a loss because, again, you're coming after people who are living outside and who are homeless for whatever reason. And 90% of those folks who are homeless are not doing so by choice. They're doing it because they either have a mental health issue or they can't find a job or whatever the case may be. They're not doing that because they want to do it. They're doing that for other reasons that are not under their control. And so it'll be interesting to see if the ACLU files a lawsuit against it. I would expect that they do under the 14th Amendment. And so we'll see how that plays out.
Definitely one to watch for the future. But we also had some environmental losses. I know we had some wins, but SB 277, tell me about that one.
This is a fun one. When people hear about it, they're shocked. So 277 makes investigating and cleaning up hazardous material optional, which I think is really not great. And it prohibits even more so the Indiana Department of Environmental Management from making environmental rules more what's called burdensome than the federal rules and regulations. In the law that was passed and how it's written, the word burdensome doesn't have any definition whatsoever. So it's going to be interesting to see how rules are promulgated under this new law, because who knows what more burdensome than federal regulations really means. Regardless of such, it basically gives IDEM as well as local governments a pass from cleaning up any hazardous materials they just don't feel like cleaning up. And we've already talked about the fact that wetlands here in Indiana are being destroyed, and it's harming farming communities all over Indiana. So this is not great because we're already in trouble. We're already putting farming land in jeopardy, and now we're going to allow even worse things to happen just because we feel like it. That doesn't seem good. I talked to my local state senator a couple of months ago. She was talking to my son's Boy Scout troop, and my son kept saying, but we have really environmental issues here in the state. We need to fix these problems. And she kept saying, well, we need to balance businesses' priorities with our own priorities. And I went, but we're ranked 50th in the state. It doesn't seem like we're balancing anything. And that was the question my son came home to me with from his Boy Scout meeting. I don't get it. We can't be balancing things when we're 50th in the state. We're clearly choosing a winner, and that winner is not us. I said, you're not wrong.
How old's your son now?
He's 12.
And he can see this when grown adults cannot.
Yeah, it was an interesting evening after the meeting, I tell you what.
Yeah, it sounds like it. But let's talk about CEA 258.
Oh boy. It's another one. This has to do with nuclear power plants. Mm-hmm. When I worked for the steel industry, our theory was we liked all energy, regardless if it was clean energy, if it was old energy from coal, if it was hydro, if it was electric, if it was solar, if it was whatever. We want it all, everything involved. Whatever wins, wins. We're going to let the market decide, but let's just go for it all because it all helps because we need energy. Well, here, this attacks nuclear power plants. It abolishes a rule that requires a permit from the Indiana Department of Environmental Management to build or operate a nuclear power plant here in Indiana. Why wouldn't we want the state of Indiana to, I don't know, find out whether or not the nuclear power company that's coming in is safe and knows what they're doing? This takes away that ability to do so. And on top of it, if you complain about it or local government wants to complain about it and have hearings about it, they can't. This law prohibits local governments from having a public hearing on whether or not they want a nuclear power plant in their backyard. That seems ridiculous. So that's a big loss.
Absolutely, that's a big loss. I mean, like, it just seems like silly to not have this oversight. Like, we have so many instances in history of why we need regulations because we will not regulate ourselves. It's just how it is, and it's just so very frustrating. But, you know, we also have some more losses to get through, and we are looking at immigration now. SEA 1. Tell me about this.
Well, SEA 1 is not just an immigration bill. It also attacks state health care and Medicare and how that's all kind of doled out. It changes a lot of stuff, maybe even with SNAP benefits. And so what it's going to do is for the federal and state health programs, which are about 100,000 people here in Indiana who are on them, they're going to have their eligibility for those programs, regardless of what program they get through the government, either the state or local or federal. They're going to have to make sure that they fit the eligibility every 6 months now. And it's also going to require some work requirements and volunteer requirements. You're going to have to prove to the government every 6 months that you are working about 80 hours a month in one of these capacities to qualify for state benefits or federal benefits. Clearly, if these folks are on state or federal benefits, they're having trouble working or volunteering, or they can't get out of their house for whatever reason, health-wise. And so this is just one of the ways that the federal government and the state government are looking at individuals who are less than and making them do things that probably they're not going to be able to do, just to lessen their burden. And the last time I checked, we had a massive surplus here in the state of Indiana that our colleagues on the right side of the aisle don't feel like we need to expend at all.
I feel like we need to use allegedly in front of surplus because here's why, is that I don't believe it's a surplus if our state is not fully funded. It's not a surplus, period. And we should be measuring how good we are as a state, how we treat the least of us, and how we're treating the least of us is not good. We're trying to take away benefits and make it impossible for them to get benefits. And that's not treating the least of us well.
Yeah. And we've already talked about how the religious side of this comes into play. A lot of these folks obviously couch their beliefs in their religion. And I don't know what denomination you are, but obviously I'm a Catholic. And the way that I was raised and the way that I believe is that we are beholden to those who are the least among us. We are taught to be compassionate and to help them out. And this obviously doesn't do that. And so maybe some folks need to check themselves in the mirror before they start passing legislation like this in the future.
Absolutely. I think there's a lot of hypocrisy and it drives me insane. It's like, I think that if you are a Christian, it makes more sense to be a Democrat at this point, because those are the views that are aligned with Jesus and the Bible versus the Republicans who will not feed 100 kids just because they're afraid one of them doesn't deserve it. Yeah. Versus Democrats who will feed all those 100 kids in case there's one kid who needs food.
That's exactly the way you should think about it. All right. Exactly.
Yes. This one just makes me so angry just in general. But also we have SEA 76, new restrictions on sanctuary policies. Let's talk about it.
Yeah. They say these are new restrictions on sanctuary cities and forces greater cooperation with the Immigration Custom and Enforcement, or ICE, law enforcement agency, the federal folks. again, it kind of depends on what side of the aisle you are and what city you live in. The larger cities that are Democrat, they're going to obviously they're law enforcement officials. They're going to cooperate with the law as it's written. I actually took a second look at this the other day because it came up in my criminal law class that I teach at IU. So folks really wanted to know how it's going to change and affect the current law. And the funny thing is it's not going to do that much different. So the current law is that the local government and the local sheriff's department and the local jail have to hold folks for 48 hours. And this law says that they have to hold people for 48 hours. So it doesn't change the law any, but they've told us that these are new restrictions on law enforcement. Well, all it does is codify the thing that already exists in federal law. So we're just mirroring what already is. So that's good. And clearly, it's just going to be another conversation between the local sheriff department and what they want to do with these ICE holding facilities. I know here in Marion County, we've got a primary coming up for who's going to be our next sheriff. And I talked to both of them last week, both candidates, and they both said, listen, we're going to do what we're supposed to do under the law, but we're not going to cooperate any further after that. So I think it just comes down to whoever is going to be your local sheriff. And it's another reason why, if you feel like you should maybe run for an office, look more local than federal.
Yes, I have been pushing a lot of people that local government is I think more important at this point, especially in Indiana, because it doesn't matter if we get, let's say in the next governor cycle, we get a Democratic governor. It does not matter if we still have a supermajority in the state house. Yeah. So we have to get Democrats on boots on the ground and in those smaller government positions if we really want to enact any meaningful change.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, we're not through all of the losses. We still have like a couple more.
We've got a couple more. The next one was SEA 256. And this is actually kind of an interesting one that, again, it's another solution looking for a problem. It forces our state-run colleges and universities here in Indiana to investigate their own students. Yes, that's right, investigate their own students. What it does is, if you fit a particular fact pattern, i.e., if you're from a country studying at Purdue or IU or any other local university here in the state, if you fit a particular characterization, or you're from a particular country and you're studying something in particularly about STEM stuff, we should be worried about you because you may cause some sort of terroristic threat to our state and to our country. And so it's forcing the universities to investigate these folks to figure out whether or not they're actually okay and actually students, or if they're actually threats to our country. Now, okay, I mean, the impetus and the thought process behind it, maybe not horrible, but look at the long-term effects that it's going to have on our colleges and universities. We want to be a welcoming state. This does not end with that result, because folks who come here from outside of our country who want to study at our wonderful universities like IU and Purdue and South Bend and Notre Dame or DePaul, like we went to, a lot of people come here from internationally and they study here at our universities and they live here, and we want to be a welcoming state. And this does not help with that process at all. We also want to be a state that quote unquote works, which means we're trying to attract these kinds of businesses to Indiana. And if we're going to bring these people here, we want them to stay so that they can work at these facilities that we train them at. And this is not going to help with that end process. So it's a balancing act. And I don't think we ended up on a good footing here with folks who are coming here internationally at all.
No. And I know that you and I have talked about this, that this is going to put burden on universities even more so. And a lot of universities, like, especially after COVID, are hurting because they didn't have as many international students. And what I've learned recently is that there's actually international students for state schools provide a lot of funding because they pay a higher tuition than even out of state students. So they were missing a lot of that funding. And this is going to exacerbate that. Yeah. And also, like, doing a background check can be very costly. So smaller universities are not going to be able to take as many international students because of it.
Correct. And a lot of our smaller universities in the state are already struggling just because we're still dealing with the COVID situation and the Great Recession situation, which unfortunately, and because of a result of the fact that we just didn't have the finances, there are not a lot of people who are coming up in Indiana who are college-aged kids. Like we were, years ago. The amount of people who are eligible to go to college in Indiana has dramatically decreased. And that is struggling for these smaller universities and colleges to have entrance of just Hoosier kids. So these universities and colleges that are smaller are having to reach outside of Indiana to fill in their freshman or incoming classes. And so it's going to make it more difficult than it has been. And that's not good because some of these schools are already struggling. So hopefully our colleagues on the other side of the aisle didn't go to places like Hanover or Earlham or Manchester or DePaul or Wabash, because this is only going to make those admissions people's jobs harder.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And it's just so crazy because we already have a problem where more of our college graduates leave the state than stay. So I feel like this is going to make that problem worse as well.
Yep.
We still have one more loss to talk about, HEA 1200. I'm going to call it that.
Yeah. This one has to do with the BMV. And so we've already seen some news stories probably in the past week where thousands of drivers have had their CDLs, their commercial driver's licenses revoked and called into question. This requires anyone who is applying for a CDL license to go through an immigration check as well as an English proficiency exam to have a commercial driver's license and to operate some sort of commercial vehicle here in the state of Indiana. It's obviously incredibly targeted at a specific set of individuals, and that's not great. Just like pretty much a lot of these other bills that we've talked about, they like to target folks for whatever reason. They seem to not want these folks in Indiana or to have good paying jobs, regardless of whether or not they're qualified or not. And again, I'm not really sure why. You would think that if they're qualified and they're able to do the work, you'd want to welcome them here. We'd like the tax revenue, but our colleagues on the other side of the aisle just don't seem to understand that concept.
No, there's not a lot of logic there, is what I like to say. But let's change gears just a little bit. There are some cases that you think that people should be paying attention to. Specifically, let's start with Allen versus Milligan.
Yeah. Oh, this is voting rights stuff. So going back to our election kind of processes and our conversation about that, there's been two cases in the Supreme Court recently in this session and just a previous session about voting rights and the Voting Rights Act. So the first one, they all kind of bases kind of knowledge-wise on Allen versus Milligan. That was a case that was argued a few years ago and decided in 2023. So in Allen, the United States Supreme Court affirmed lower courts' rulings that found that Alabama had violated what's called Section 2 of the Voting Rights Amendment, and that's the enforcement section. So in that situation, Alabama they redistricted just like they normally do. No weirdness like here in Indiana. So they rewrote their congressional maps and their state maps. In Alabama, though, about 20% of the population is Black, okay? And that's how the VRA comes into play here. About their maps that they redrew, only one of the 7 congressional districts had a Black representative. That percentage is 14%. 14 is not equal to 27. So that triggers the Voting Rights Act, Section 2. And then the state of Alabama was challenged. That was found to be a violation of it. And they redrew the maps. The new map produced 2 out of 7 representatives who were Black. Okay. That was good for the VRA. It met the qualifications. Importantly, during the Supreme Court oral arguments, it seemed to find that they were thinking about finding Section 2 unconstitutional. This is very, very bad, very, very bad, because there's a section in our society that thinks that discrimination doesn't exist still, which clearly isn't the case. We've talked about that for the last hour, that people are still discriminating against individuals and they're targeting folks with their legislation. Well, that's bad. But there is a specific section of this country that don't believe this discrimination exists anymore. We're in a post-discrimination world is what they'll tell you. Well, that's not true. The problem, of course, is what is the Supreme Court going to do And they seemed to think that maybe Section 2 was no longer needed. And this is the only section of the VRA that really still exists. And so it was something to watch, and which, again, we're all kind of afraid of as constitutional people. We're a little bit afraid of what the Supreme Court's going to do. Now, in this past session, we've had two cases come up that mirror that problem in Alabama. The first one was in Louisiana. They had oral arguments in October. There, about a third of Louisiana's population is Black. And in the new maps they adopted in 22, that produced only one congressional seat out of 6. That's 16%. Clearly not equal, right? That's how the Voting Rights Act gets triggered, okay? So, of course, folks in those districts sued and said these maps are discriminatory. And the lower courts all said, yep, totally discriminatory. Rewrite the maps, do it. It's not a question. Go get it done. Well, Louisiana did, okay? The new map produced 2 out of 6, which would be equal, about a third, okay? But because they switched the maps and folks who look like you and me found that to be discriminatory, they are now claiming reverse racism before the Supreme Court. And so they're challenging the maps because their white vote was diluted to provide an extra congressional seat to people of color. And so that's an interesting argument that's going to have to be decided. It was, again, argued in October. I would not expect that ruling until the end of this term, which is going to be in June or July, depending on when they want to decide to release it. But that's an interesting to watch. That one is Louisiana versus Calais. Okay. The second one that just happened about a couple of weeks ago was Watson versus the Republican National Committee. Yes, the Republican National Committee decided to bring a lawsuit. This one is a challenge of folks in Mississippi. Do you notice a trend? Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana. Not great looks, but it is what it is. Funny enough, in this one, the Libertarian Party actually challenged along with the Republican National Committee, so it adds a little bit of a wrinkle. So those of you who are listening who are libertarians, clearly you believe in government because you just sued in front of the United States Supreme Court. Sorry for you. Okay. In current Mississippi law, the current Mississippi law was accepting and counting ballots 5 days after the election. Okay. This was a law that was created in Mississippi to counter the arguments by the current administration after the 2020 election, who said voting by mail is illegal. You counted ballots 10 days after the actual election day. You can't do that. Even though they were postmarked before election day, they were mailed like through the United States Postal Service. And of course, the United States Postal Service, because they have a lot of mail, because they're the only actual federal carrier of mail, sometimes takes time to deliver said mail. It's not that illogical, but welcome to the world we live in, okay? So this lawsuit actually challenges that 5-day rule, which is a pretty reasonable rule. We're adding a cutoff date. We're all agreeing. This is the state legislature saying we're going to give you 5 grace days. Take it or leave it. If it comes out on day 6, we're not going to count it. Cool. All right. Democrats even were like, you know what? Fine. We'll compromise. That seems pretty rational. 5 days is long enough for the Postal Service to get their act together. But the Republican National Committee and the Libertarian Committee have decided that they only want Election Day to be Election Day. So if your absentee ballot is sent on time in the mail and postmarked as such, if it arrives 1 day or 1 minute after Election Day, 12:01 a.m., after the first Tuesday in November, your ballot is not going to count if this lawsuit goes through. And so that's rather ridiculous because we don't control the mail. That's the federal government doing it. So it'll be interesting to see what the Supreme Court does. Again, it's another one where I would expect the decision not to come until the end of term in June or July, but it's something to watch. That one's called Watson versus the Republican National Committee. It made news because even the conservative justices, including Chief Justice Roberts, put some zingers on there to the Solicitor General and basically said the Solicitor General said something like, we live in a different world in today's society. And the Chief Justice said, we may live in a different world, but it's the same Constitution, Mr. Solicitor General.
Good to hear he's standing up a little bit there. A little bit. But there's one more, and this one's Trump v. Barbara.
Yeah, Trump v. Barbara. It's an interesting little name of the title, of course. But this one, occurs because it's trying to end birthright citizenship. This one was argued again just a couple of weeks ago. This one was, again, another quote-worthy oral argument. This is the one that the president actually showed up to at the United States Supreme Court and then left somewhere in the middle of it, which was equally as odd. By the way, a sitting president of the United States, this is the first time they've ever actually witnessed a live oral argument at the Supreme Court. So a lot of odd things. But back when the current president was inaugurated on January 20th last year, one of the first executive orders that he signed was an attempt to end birthright citizenship. Of course, the problem is the Constitution specifically states that if you are born in the United States, you are a United States citizen, and you are offered all the legal rights that are enshrined in the United States Constitution, whether you like it or not. Once again, it seems as though there's a particular set of people who are targeting folks who don't look like them, which is really, really bad. And why the Constitution specifically lays out in its original origin that you can't do that. It's not good. We don't want that. Well, so this was, again, just another great oral argument and another thing. If you want to listen to them, they're fantastic. They're wonderful to listen to if you go and drive long distances for your job. Instead of listening to books on tape, load up a United States Supreme Court oral argument. I trust you. It may be a little bit more educational than that murder mystery that you're listening to. But this one has a little bit long legal history behind it. So in 1868, which is where the Solicitor General and the President of the United States is founding their argument, way back in 1868, which, by the way, is right after the United States Civil War, Congress passed the 14th Amendment, right? Cool. That actual amendment, the 14th Amendment, was copied by 29 other countries around the world because it was so well written. Okay. It's a foundational element of current democracies around the world. Well, around the turn of the century, there was an individual who was born in San Francisco of Chinese descent. He goes home to China to go visit family. And when he comes back, they won't allow him back into the country because he doesn't look like everybody else. And he's coming from China. So he sues based on the 14th Amendment, and the United States Supreme Court hears the oral arguments and they find in his favor, saying, no, that dude's a citizen. He doesn't need any papers extra. He was born here. He's got a birth certificate. Let him in. I don't know what we're doing. The 14th Amendment is clear. This is the language. It's not confusing in any way, shape, or form. This is a done deal. Period. Okay. This goes all the way back to 1982. So about 100 and some odd years later, another lawsuit comes before the United States Supreme Court where the Supreme Court argues or decides that even undocumented children in this country cannot be barred from attending public school in this country because they are in the United States. And because they are in the United States, the 14th Amendment and the rights provided by the federal Constitution are attached to them because they are in the United States. It's one of the things where, if you remember 8 years ago, there was all this conversation with what the administration was doing with immigration and trying to force people out and not giving them hearings. Well, the problem is that once you're in the United States, current case law says you are awarded due process, period, end of story. There's no caveat to that whatsoever. Well, that's how the 82 case was decided. You're in the United States, you have due process, you're afforded all the rights that you are given, not only in the federal government, but also in the state and local governments as well. So even if you're undocumented children, you get to go to school here. That's the way it works. And so now the administration is trying to say that those rights are not allowed to be able to have to anyone outside of this world that they've created. So we'll see how that turns out. Again, there was a lot of really good zingers back and forth. I don't think, based on the oral arguments, that the administration is going to win this one. I don't think it's going to be even close. It may be 8-1, and it may be 9-0, but I don't expect this to come out until, again, June or July, just because of its controversial nature. So this will probably come out this summer, but I think that the challengers are going to win, and the executive order is going to be found unconstitutional.
All right. Well, those are some interesting ones to watch for sure. I will be keeping track of them. And I didn't know you could listen to the U.S. Supreme Court like a podcast almost.
You can, yeah.
Interesting. I might actually do that. But let's talk about some important dates coming up because we need to know these dates. let's go over why we need to know these dates. What are they? Why are they important?
So the first one obviously starts today. Welcome to early voting across Indiana. All county clerk's offices must be open for at least 7 hours per day, all the way up until May 2nd or May 3rd. So period, end of story, whatever county you live in Indiana, guess what? You can early vote today. Here in Marion County, satellite locations are open from 11 a.m. until 6 p.m. from today all the way until Sunday, May 3rd. It may be different in your county, wherever you are, but you can go to the state website and find out what your polling locations are and when they're open. If you can't go to that website, you can go to a whole plethora of other ones to figure out where your polling places are. If they don't have satellite locations, then you can go to the county clerk's office, which should be at the county courthouse, and you should be able to vote there. But early voting has to be open starting today and all the way through Saturday, May 2nd or Sunday, May 3rd, depending on your county. Once those things shut down, of course, we have a primary day. That's May 5th. That's a big day. We've got a lot of races that have a lot of challengers in them. That's going to be really exciting for the first time in a very long time. And a lot of these Democratic races, no matter if it's for the state legislature or for federal House seats, have a lot of primary challenges. So that's going to be exciting to watch news from about 6:01 p.m. on May 5th until these things are decided. So I'm excited because I get to watch local news like it's really kind of exciting for the first time in a long time. It'll be fun to watch. Then after primary day, May 8th is the first day that local county parties, depending on which side of the aisle you are, can fill any ballot vacancy. Okay. So you can go to your local county party and say, hey, this was left vacant on the primary thing. It needs somebody to fill it. I'd like to run for it. Whatever that may be, if it's open space that didn't have somebody chosen in the primary, you can express interest to your local county party chair, if there is one, and you can say, I'd like to run for that. And then they get to vet you. They figure out whether or not you actually qualify under their local county rules. And if you do, you might get selected to be on the November ballot. Look at that. Kind of fun. Okay. On June 5th, for the Democratic side, we have our Hoosier Hospitality Dinner. That's in the evening. It's kind of like a VIP event. It's pretty cool. Highly recommend you go. It might be a little expensive, but it's worth it because it's a lot of fun. We kind of celebrate each other and make sure that everybody's doing okay in our little community that we have. And then the next day is the Indiana Democratic Party State Convention. Something that's kind of odd about Indiana is that on the off-year elections, people like Secretary of State and some other state offices are chosen by the state delegates. They are not chosen by the primary voters. And so here at the state conventions, both Republican and Democrat, we're going to have some very interesting choices. We've got two candidates running for Secretary of State in the Democratic Party. They're both very well qualified. They're both very well known. One of them has run for things before. The other one is very well known just because of his family. And he's an incredibly qualified human being. So it'll be interesting to see what the state delegates decide to do with that challenge between the two of them and which way they want to go. It's going to be an exciting Saturday. I know that for sure. Don't ask me who I'm voting for. I won't tell you. But I've got some reasons for that because I am now the chair of my township. And so I'm an official party official, and I can't tell you who I'm going to vote for as a delegate. But regardless, it's going to be interesting to see. And we're going to see a lot of people coming to Indianapolis for both conventions and experience a little bit of community and figure out how we're going to go forward. So that's good. Going back to the thing that starts on May 8th, July 3rd is when that deadline is. So you've got about, a month and a half before you have to decide whether or not you want to fill one of those open spots on your ballot. If you do, fantastic. Just tell your local county chairman by July 2nd. That's probably a good call. Again, you're going to have to qualify under their local rules. So I wouldn't wait until July 3rd if you're really thinking about doing it. Also, that's obviously a federal holiday weekend, so you may not want to wait until the day before Independence Day, especially since this is the 250th anniversary. We're probably going to be having fun. If you're a Democrat and you've never been down to what's called the Indiana Democratic Editorial Association convention down in French Lick, or IDEA or IDEA, I highly recommend it. It is a lot of fun. It's down in French Lick. It's for a whole weekend. Information on that is at the state party website. You can go and figure out. We've got rooms, blocks, and a whole 9 yards. But it's a lot of fun. I've gone for a few years in a row. I enjoy it immensely. And it's a time for all of us to kind of really put our hair down and not worry about politics for a few days and to really kind of talk about what we want to do as a party. And we get to network and see each other, and it's wonderful. So I highly recommend it if you're interested in getting more involved in politics, especially on the Democratic Party side. On October 5th, that's the deadline to register to vote in the general election. Just like we had a deadline to register to vote for the primary, October 5th is for the general election. So make sure if you haven't voted or haven't registered to vote or gotten your 18-year-old to register, you probably should do that beforehand. You can do that either at Indiana Voters. You can do that at the state Secretary of State's office website. You can also register through things like vote.org or iwillvote.com, a whole bunch of different options for you. Just make sure that your 18-year-old is registered to vote. And if you haven't done so, please take care of it. Voting is obviously the way that we choose the path for our communities. And it's the closest thing we get to being direct representatives of the Constitution of the United States, in my opinion. October 22nd is the deadline to apply for an absentee ballot for the general election. There are specific requirements that you have to meet in order to get an absentee ballot here in Indiana. Again, our colleagues across the aisle think that our ballot is somehow in danger of being fraudulently taken. Data suggests otherwise. Regardless, you have to fit some requirements in order to get an absentee ballot. So just take care of that if you meet those requirements. And then, of course, November 3rd, the first Tuesday after the first Monday in November, that's our general election. And it's going to be really interesting to see what happens, not only here statewide, but also nationally.
I wanted to mention about registering to vote. If you have not checked your registration anytime recently, you should check and make sure it's still there. Before the last election, I had been purged from the voter rolls, but I was checking my registration monthly and was able to catch it. So if you don't check your registration monthly, you might want to, because it seems that the Attorney General and the Secretary of State's office like to purge people sometimes. Also, you want to make sure that your address is up to date and your name is up to date if you have changed your name. And it is a pain in the ass, but you need to do it if you would like to vote. But let's talk a little bit more about this Indiana State Convention that's coming up.
Sure.
You were mentioning there's the Secretary of State race, which is Mr. Bobai and Miss Blythe Potter. But there are also some other races happening. What races are happening? Why do we need to know about them? Why do we need to fill them? Who should fill them?
Yeah, as far as I understand it, there's two other races that are being considered at the state convention. The first one is state comptroller, which used to be like the state auditor. They just changed the name. It doesn't change the office in any way, shape, or form. They said it just more aligned with what they actually did. Fine, whatever. You can call it whatever you want. But we don't have someone, as far as I know, who is running for that in the state party. And then the other one is treasurer for the state, and we don't have someone up for election either. So really the state convention, as far as I understand it, at this point for us Democrats, will really be centered around that Secretary of State's race.
All righty. But the state's also putting out a party platform. It sounds like the Democrats are putting out a platform to kind of try to unite us a little bit, I assume.
Sure. Yeah.
What is that platform?
You can go look it up at the state party website. It's already published, or at least a draft of it is. So that's really great. And I know they're doing some listening tours around the state. Again, those are on the events page of the state party website, just to get input on it. But one of the things that you get to do as a state delegate, if you've signed up to be such, and if you get elected to be such in the primary, is you get to throw out amendments into the state party platform. And we get to consider them as a convention, as delegates, and we'll have to research them, and we'll have people speaking to why they think that's important or not important, depending on which side of the aisle you decide to be on. And then we're eventually going to have to vote on those amendments and the state party as a whole, the state party platform as a whole, so that we can put out basically an issue statement of who we believe we are and what our party platform and our mission is over the next couple of years. So some of them obviously is affordability. The state party platform wants to reduce healthcare costs, lower utility bills, which we've talked about already, improve access to housing, which is a massive issue for a lot of our mayors. If you don't remember, a couple of years ago, the state party, the Democrats, won more Democratic mayor seats than they had in recent memory. And so that still exists today. And one of the things keep hearing from all these mayors around the state of Indiana who are Democrats are, hey, we need more housing. We need more, affordable housing. And that's going to be a massive issue, along with the utility costs over the next couple of years, especially with what's going on with the president's foreign policy agenda. It's going to be more costly to build houses. It's going to be more costly to update these houses because of what's going on and the energy crises that he's causing. So how do we figure that out? And we're going to try to write some things into the party platform to deal with that. They're going to focus on education and an economy that works for everybody, including raising the minimum wage. Indiana is still one of the lowest minimum wage states in the country, as well as the fact that our minimum wage nationally hasn't been raised in quite some time. There's that big push for $15 an hour, and it's still there. It's still a valid reason, valid logical points behind it. And again, that might be something that we need to figure out nationally so that the state of Indiana then is pushed and mandated in order to increase their own minimum standard of wages of living. You've all probably seen the massive data on how much it costs to rent a one-person apartment, not only in Indiana, but nationwide. And you can't do it on minimum wage anymore. You just can't. It's not possible. And unfortunately, the laws, not only in Indiana, but across the country, haven't kept up with cost of living, and it needs to be addressed. So we're going to try to figure that out. We're also going to focus on whether or not we should continue to push for legalizing marijuana, just like the states around us have, and how we're going to figure out how to tax that if we do. Privacy rights, funding public safety, which has been significantly hurt through SB 1, which was passed in the session previous by the governor and the Republican Party. That's been attacking a lot of local communities and municipalities. Here in Indianapolis, I know Beech Grove, which is about the southeastern area, central of Indianapolis, they just had to sell their fire department, essentially, and rent it out to Indianapolis. It can get covered because they don't have enough money to fund fire safety anymore based on their budget. It's pretty bad. And they're not the only community that's having that problem. It's happening in small communities. It's happening in big communities because tax provisions got taken away in SB 1, and municipalities screamed at the General Assembly and said, please don't do this to us because we're going to have to pass all these referendums. But the state General Assembly said, we're not going to really listen to you. You can figure it out. You're smart people. And unfortunately, now the tax burden, instead of being forced upon it statewide and being divvied up the right way, now those tax issues and referendum issues and revenue issues are solely on these mayors and these city councils who are having a really, really rough time funding public safety. And it's all because of Governor Braun and the Republicans in the General Assembly. It's not great.
It's not great, putting it mildly, but there are some good things happening around the state. For example, we have very competitive federal primaries this time around. Mm-hmm. There's only 2 seats that are not contested.
Yeah. So Congressman Naran, who's up in the 1st Congressional District, is still running as the incumbent, and nobody's challenging him, as far as I know, on the Democratic side. So he'll ease through on victory. And more importantly, the Republicans have decided not to target him this race, mostly because we defeated redistricting. So it has some actual real-world consequences for our congressional races. So Frank's going to go ahead and continue to represent very well, by the way, represent the 1st Congressional District in Congress. And he's doing a great job. He just spoke in front of the U.S. Trade Representative, and he's still representing folks in the Steel Caucus incredibly well. So Frank should continue to do what he's doing, which is an awesome job. So that's good. Over in the South Bend area, we've got Jamie DiCio as well as Sean Mayans. That's a contested race. So again, we're going to have to figure these out on May 5th. So May 5th. So if you haven't voted yet, again, early voting across the county's satellite locations, and they have to be open as of today, please go out and vote in these contested primaries, because if you don't, and the person you don't like gets elected, then you really don't have a reason to complain. So if you want to complain, by all means do so, but please vote in order to have that right to do it. The 3rd Congressional District is going to be represented by Kelly Thompson. She's a former Republican who's become a Democrat, and I've met her on a couple of occasions. She actually spoke at the Allen County dinner and did a wonderful job. Kelly's going to be a great candidate for those folks up in the Fort Wayne / Northeast area of Indiana. In the 4th congressional district, which is the largest area, is really Lafayette, and it goes all the way down to Greencastle, where you and I went to school. There's a plethora of folks running. If my last count was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 people, there's 8 people running to be the congressional candidate in District 4, which is incredible, right? That's awesome. Hopefully, the people who don't get selected out of that, hopefully they choose to stay involved and maybe contact their local county chair, just like we've talked about, and maybe run for something different. Just a thought. So they don't waste their name notoriety that they've built up over the last couple of weeks and months through the primary. Not a bad idea. Here in Congressional District 5 in the Indianapolis area, we've got a whole bunch of people who are running. They're very well qualified. It's going to be an interesting race. The most I guess, famous person, if you really want to use the F word, that is running is Senator J.D. Ford. He's a personal friend of mine. And so he's decided he feels like he can best serve his constituents by serving in Congress. So he's decided to leave his state Senate seat in order to try to become a congressman. So we'll see how that works out for him. But that's going to be an interesting race. It's also one that Joe Biden won and Vice President Harris won in the 20 and 24 elections. It was that area just north of Indianapolis. And so it's been a district that Democrats have traditionally over the past, 10 to 15 years targeted very hardly. And we know that there was a lot of people moving north from the Indianapolis area into Congressional District 5. So it's going to be interesting to see if we can get someone past the current congressional person, which is Ms. Sparks, who I've got my own opinions about and seems to always be in some sort of hot water with the president and the Speaker of the House for some strange reason. But yeah, she's been outraised by, I think, 3 of these candidates that are running as Democrats. So she's being outraised right now by a whole bunch of people in our party, and it's not combined, it's individually. So she's got a lot of work to do, and we've got some great people who are running in that congressional district race who may be able to take her out and to win that congressional race. So that's CD5. In 6, there's 4 people running, and that's the area where I live in. They're going to take on potential billionaire Mr. Shreve, who ran an unsuccessful campaign for mayor here in Indianapolis not too long ago. Haven't seen any kind of real work that Mr. Shreve has done as my congressional representative. He's put out a couple of new wonderfully made Facebook ads that I've seen come across my page in the last couple of days, which is really interesting. But again, I have not heard him doing anything real substantive. And so we'll see if he has staying power. My thought is that he may get bored in Congress because he's not running a company. He's one of 435 people, and that doesn't give you a lot of power. And he doesn't seem like the kind of person who's going to stay long in that race. But that's okay. We're going to see if any of these 4 Democrats can win in November, and they've got a good shot. A couple of people who have some really good backgrounds. So in the most hotly contested race in Indiana, which be the Congressional District 7, we've obviously got the incumbent, Mr. Carson, who's been there for 18 years. Mr. Carson and I are friends. I've given him money in the past. I will continue to give him money in the future if he continues to stay in Congress. I think he does an absolutely wonderful job, not only for Indianapolis, but for the United States. He sits on the Intelligence Committee. He's in the leadership in the House Party. And so he's got some significant clout in Washington, D.C. Challenging him is our former Secretary of State and Attorney General candidate, Ms. Destiny Wells, and then also George Hornato. Both of those individuals have been involved in the Democratic Party at a high level for a very long time, and they've got good platforms. They just feel like they could be better representatives than Mr. Carson. And you know what? Let's hear them out. Let's see if they can push past Mr. Carson in the primary and see what they can do. But that's going to be one to watch, and I would assume that that's kind of going to lead that coverage on election night eve that I talked about, that I'm going to be sitting in front of my TV with a bunch of popcorn, because that'll be interesting to watch what those poll numbers come back with. Just outside of Indianapolis, in the southern part of the state, you've got 8 and 9. 8 is the southwest area, Terre Haute, all the way down to Evansville. That's got 4 people running. The person who I think is kind of leading that race is Miss Mary Allen. I've met her a couple of times, but all 4 again have great resumes. They're wonderful advocates for their positions. And again, we're going to need to figure out who's going to take on that race so that we can figure out who we can support in November. So again, if you live in that area of Indiana, you got to go vote, because those 4 people need to be chosen. Which one is going to represent us as their party representative? And then the 9th, we've got 4 people again who are running. This one includes the former individual who ran last time, Mr. Peck, and then a couple of different other individuals. Again, they're all very well qualified. They're incredibly well spoken. So again, if you haven't voted in a Democratic primary in a long time, just because there really hasn't been any need, that is not this election at all. We need you to go out there and actually vote, because we've got some choices that need to be made, and you have to do it on our behalf. Without your help, we're not going to be able to have a good candidate going forward. So,
absolutely. And I do hope that, whoever becomes victorious in all of these races, that maybe some of these people either shift to another position or maybe help that campaign. Because at the end of the day, I think the goal for everyone is to turn Indiana into more of a representative state. And that looks more purple. So in order to do that, we need to flip some seats.
We do. And so, the thing that we started the show off with, which is, if we have people running in a lot of these races, and sometimes that's going to have primary elections, and that's good. We want people to be involved. We want more voices, because that's going to sharpen what they say in the campaign world. That's going to sharpen our knife for the general election. And that's good. We want that kind of challenge. And so it's good that all these people are putting their names forward. They're writing it down on a list. It's wonderful. I congratulate every single person who decides that they want to run, because it's not easy, and they should be congratulated regardless of what happens.
It's a grind for sure. So it's not an easy task. But let's talk a little bit more about the elections. So the Democratic Legislative Campaign Committee, it says they've decided that Indiana is in a place that we can break the supermajority.
We can, yeah. Because of what's going on nationally, and because of the election results that have been happening since 2024, there's been a lot of special elections, and the Democrats have done incredibly well across the board. They've outperformed by massive numbers, no matter what the general election is, and whether or not they actually win that special election or not, they have significantly moved that number massively. In the last special election that we had, which was down in Georgia, our candidate outperformed by almost 20 points. It was insane. And so we know that people are upset. They don't like the way that the country is going. And so the DLCC, which is the Legislative Campaign Committee, has started to look at legislatures that could be flipped, or the supermajorities could be flipped. And Indiana is one of those that they've chosen to target, which means that our House and Senate caucuses get more campaign money so that we can have better campaign operations, which I know helps tremendously. These candidates have a hard time raising money. They're usually moms and dads who are just doing what they think is right. And it's really hard to raise money and, either run a business or go to work or raise their kids at the same time. And so all of this is going to help, and they're going to give us a lot more money and a lot more support, which is awesome from DC.
Absolutely. Fundraising is often the hardest part. So people need that money.
Yeah. And the thing that the DLCC is going to focus on is most likely the Indiana House. In that, we only need about 4 seats to flip in order to beat the supermajority. And obviously that means a lot to get more compromises and to have more legislative wins than losses, as we talked about at the top of the show. So that's a big thing. The one thing that we need to worry about, though, as Democrats, is that we're going to be losing 2 state senators this election. The first one is, of course, J.D. Ford, who's decided to run for Congress up in the 5th. We talked about that just recently. And then the other individual who's decided not to run for re-election is Senator Hunley. She just announced a couple of days ago that she's going to try to become the first Black female mayor of Indianapolis, which is an amazing thing to do. She's going to have a couple of people to challenge her in her dreams to do that on the local level. We won't get into that because that's not until 2027. So we'll let that kind of play out the way it's going to play out. So we've got to find somebody to fill her seat. I'm not so much worried about SD 46, which is Andrea's district. I am a little bit worried about how we're going to fill JD's district, but I know we've got some really great candidates who are vying to become JD's successor. And we'll see how that works out up on the north side of Indianapolis.
Yeah, I think that's the one people are most concerned about because he flipped that seat.
He did.
So I think people are kind of wondering what's going to happen with him not there.
Yeah.
But it sounds like the DCC is also kind of getting involved as well.
The Congressional Campaign Committee is going to obviously have targeted races just like they do every cycle. Here in Indiana, in the last couple of cycles, they've really targeted Congressman Mervan's district and lent him a lot of help just because it's been targeted by the Republican Congressional Campaign Committee. This time, they're not challenging Congressman Mervan. He should be fine in the general election. And so therefore, the DCCC has decided not to target any races at this point. We'll see what happens maybe with the 5th district, if depending on who gets elected, and maybe depending on who gets elected in the 7th district, the DCCC may need to get involved there too. So it's always a fluid option about what's going on in DC until all the primaries are done. But right now they're not targeting anybody, but that doesn't mean they don't have their eye on Indiana a little bit.
Okay. What about the Democratic Senatorial Campaign Committee?
Yeah. So the one thing that just go back to the DCCC, the one thing that we need to kind of talk about is the fact, again, the overperformance of everybody and the massive amounts of retiring of Republican congressional individuals, where they're losing about, 50 some odd members in Congress, and about 40 of them are Republicans who are retiring. That's a massive amount of people. And in fact, it's the largest this century. The last time we've had that amount of mass resignation was in the 90s. And when that happened, the Democrats took back control of the House of Representatives, and they won like 30 of the 40 seats. So what we're seeing nationally, as well as the fact that the president's numbers continue to decrease at an exponential level. The last numbers that I saw for approval ratings was he was hovering now around 38%. And people are like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that he's still 38% of the country still approves of him. I always remind people that President Nixon, the day that he resigned and left the White House, had 34% approval rating. So 38 ain't great, okay, when you're talking about it, because about a third of the country is going to support the president no matter what they do. Period. End of story. So 38 or 39% is not awesome. He's also completely underwater when it comes to the economy. And if we go back to my wonderful, if I must say so, election day tradition, the night before election day every year, I watch The War Room, which is a documentary about the 1992 presidential election. I watch that traditionally and religiously the night before election day because I'm a nerd. And back then it was the economy, stupid, and it's still the economy, stupid. And so the president's economy rating is now, he's something like 43% disapproval rating, which is absolutely atrocious. It's one of the worst ratings we've ever had for a president at this point in their term. And so if we combine those two numbers, as well as the mass resignation, the last number that I've seen from the Cook report, as well as other experts out there, say that we're probably going to pick up anywhere between 30 and 40 seats in the House of Representatives. So if we do our work and we do it well, I have a feeling that we're going to be able to take back the House federally, which is awesome. And we'll be able to do some things with that are desperately needed for the country. Now, when it comes to the Senate, it's an outside shot that we win that as well, depending on what the numbers continue to do. The thing that we really need to worry about, however, is in the Senate, only a third of them are elected at a time. We're in class 2, and the ones that we really need to look out for are the 4 following. The first 4, one major one that we're looking at to win is probably North Carolina. That is Governor Cooper. He's a famous politician, a long-term family politician in North Carolina. He's beloved in that state. Tom Tillis is resigning. He's losing that seat because he doesn't want to be a senator anymore. And it looks like Governor Cooper is going to win that race. And so that's going to be one to watch. It's also one of the first ones on the East Coast. So we'll be able to see kind of what's happening around the country with what happens with Governor Cooper and that race. The other ones we need to watch are Maine. Senator Collins is up for re-election, and we've got a couple of candidates up there that are going to vie for that spot in the general election. There's a primary still to happen, but there's a lot of excitement if you have not paid attention to the Maine race around a guy named Graham Plotner. He's become kind of famous. He's well-spoken. And he seems like he's the front runner against the governor of Maine, who's running in that race as well. So we'll see what happens, but Senator Collins is definitely in trouble. She's running for re-election again. This will be like her 25th year in the Senate after she said she'd only serve one term, and that was like 40 years ago. So, it is what it is. The other ones to watch right next door to us is Ohio. The race has significantly changed in the past 2 weeks. In fact, it's started to lean more towards the Democratic candidates in Ohio, not only for the Senate race, but also for the governor race. We have a former Senator, Sherrod Brown, who's a massive union guy, local business guy. In fact, he only wears union-produced suits. That's one of his big caveats. And his wife is amazing. If you've never met Senator Brown's wife, she's an amazing human being to get to know. But he's got a real good shot at winning that race against the individual who took over for J.D. Vance. And then some of the other ones that we're looking at, I already talked about Alaska. That's another one that's amazingly on the list to take over. Those are the 4 top races that we have that we could flip. And if we flip those 4, we're going to take over the United States Senate again. We still have to make sure that we win Georgia. That's Senator Ossoff. He's running for re-election. He needs to get reelected. And then we've got to also defend Michigan and New Hampshire. We've got some resignations in Michigan and New Hampshire. Michigan is Senator Peters. I was on his early campaign stuff back when I was in D.C., and he's been a wonderful United States Senator, a wonderful representative of the Democratic Party, but he's resigning. So we're going to have to figure out who's winning there and then make sure that the Democrat stays there in Michigan as well as New Hampshire. And then we've got some races up in Minnesota that need to get figured out, but I'm not too worried about Minnesota and Democrats. The one weird one that I think is out there that could flip a lot of people's heads is down in Texas. We've got Representative Talarico, who won the primary, and he speaks like we do and kind of how we have throughout this entire process in the last couple of hours. He has a very religious bent to him. He's a pastor. He was a school teacher. He's very plain spoken. People like that down in Texas. He's very popular. And there's some problems in the Republican senatorial campaign down there in Texas. And so if Representative Talarico can pull out Texas, it's going to be a landslide. And so that's the one I'm really watching to find out exactly what kind of a blue wave we're going to expect here in November.
Well, there's a lot of exciting things to watch, it sounds like. But we've already seen some big electoral wins already, it sounds like. Tell us about that.
Yeah, like I said, I mean, around the country, we've had a ton of special elections in the past year to a year and a half since the 2024 general. And in every single one of those races, the Democrats have exponentially outperformed in each one of those races, regardless of whether or not they've actually won the election or not. They have beat the traditional model by 10, 20 points. And so that's where a lot of these pundits are coming out saying, hey, listen, this is looking really bad for the Republican Party, because if these numbers hold true, the wave that could be coming could be massive. And like I said, it could be 30 or 40 seats in the United States House of Representatives. And generally when that happens, that takes over, right? Everybody in the rest of the state kind of follows that trend. Or in the state, the country follows that trend. And so one of the nice things about having a full slate of state house and state Senate candidates and filling out the rest of the ballot here in Indiana is we can tell that people are upset with the way that the country is going. It's not, people don't like the fact that their utilities are going up. They don't like the fact that they're paying more at the pump. They don't like the fact that their eggs are still not expensive. And these are all things that the 2024 election was based off of. Right? People were like, yo, there's inflation and it's bad. And our dollar bill is not going as far as it used to go. And we're upset about that. We want you to fix it. And so a lot of the president's campaign was based on that specific thing. And he has not delivered. And so when he hasn't delivered, it's the economy, stupid. It's the same thing that we had for the last 30 years. And if you can't take care of the economy, things are not going to go well for you. And that's what we're seeing across the board, regardless of the election that is happening on that specific evening. And so we're hoping, fingers crossed, that trend continues for the next couple of months, and that a wave that hits in November is going to be pretty massive for the Democratic Party.
Absolutely. And I would love to see it. I would love to see some of these things get fixed that have been destroyed since the second Trump term. But I want to talk a little bit about what people can do next. That's always the question I get from people is like, what can I do to help? What can I do to do my part, my little part, if I don't have a lot of time, or if I have a little time or whatever? What can people do to help?
So there's a whole plethora of stuff, and if you have a different idea, by God, do it. That's the wonderful thing about being involved in politics or being involved in a campaign, is that no matter what you want to do or what you feel like you can help with, that thing is going to be helpful to whatever campaign you're going to decide to volunteer for. I've had people decide they're going to be the chief baker for the volunteers, and they've baked cookies for the phone banks. That's fantastic. I can't ask you to do it. If that's what you feel comfortable doing, do it. If you want to be the person who's like, hey, there's a phone bank on Saturday and these people need a crock pot full of food because I can make good chili, do it. We would love free food. Are you kidding me? That's great. If you don't feel like comfortable knocking on a door, fine. You don't feel picking up a phone, fine. You don't feel writing out a postcard, totally cool. Do something. I've had people bring their kids into field offices. Is it okay that I brought my child in, 9 years old? They can't get on the phone. They're not going to knock. Yeah, it's totally fine. Here's a piece of paper and some crayons. Why don't you draw a picture and put it up on the wall? Here's some Scotch tape. Do some arts and crafts. Make people happy. Artwork on the wall, fabulous thing to have in a field office. Do it. If that makes you feel important and feel involved, I'm never going to tell a volunteer no, ever. It's not going to happen. Not in anything I'm ever involved in. So that's just above the board, just one thing just to keep in mind. People think, oh, I can't do X. I can't give $1,000. I can't. It's okay. That's fine. That's not a problem. Just do something. Get involved in a campaign that you feel connected to in one way, shape, or form, because that's being involved, and that helps that candidate feel like they're doing the right thing. And that gives them confidence, or her to do confidence in whatever they're doing. And that also helps the volunteers who are doing the phone calls and the door knocks and the postcard campaign, or putting together the manuals in the back, or the scripts, or whatever it may be. If you're helping people feel better about themselves at a campaign site or a field office, you are doing amazing work. And I would love to just thank you personally for doing what you do, no matter how small or how weird it is. It all matters, and it's all great. But specifically, here's some things that you can look for. The first thing you need to do is early voting is open. Go vote. Do the thing. Get it out of the way. Then once you go vote and get that out of the way, you can decide kind of what path you want to do. A lot of counties need people to help at the polls. You can volunteer to be a poll watcher or an election official. Contact your local clerk's office. They most likely are going to pay you for doing that job. That's a good thing, okay? Here in Indiana, people who have never done poll watching or election day working, you can make up to about $200 at the starting level of doing that job just for the day. Now, it's a 14-hour day on election day, but you still make money. If you've been doing it for a while, the clerk's office can pay you up to $260. That's a lot of money on one day that you can make just for working on election day. So you can go work in a poll. That'd be wonderful. People always need folks to do that. And you're, again, on the front lines of democracy if you're doing that. That's a great thing to do. If you don't want to work for the election division or your county clerk or whatever, because of whatever reason, doesn't mean it's not valid, you can go find the candidate that you like. Research them. Whoever. If you've already voted, go call the person that you voted for. Say, hey, what do you need? How can I help? It could be hosting him or her at a fundraising thing. You just open your house up. It could be a listening session where you gather everybody in your neighborhood and they come over to your house and you have potluck dinner and they hear from the candidate that you believe in. That helps because it gets that person out. If it's walking next door to your neighbors and going, hey, have you registered to vote? That's a thing. And that helps. It's called relational organizing. If you actually do register your neighbor or your church community member that you've never talked to before, or you just feel like you've got some sort of connection to and you want to push them to register and vote, go do it. Drive somebody to the poll. Why not? Hey, have you voted yet? No. Why? I don't have a ride to the polls. Cool. Get in my car. Let's go. Let's go do it. All of this helps. And if you're a Democrat, tell them so. Because, it might be something that switches their brain on to go, oh, well, you're not the mean person that I listen to on Fox News all the time. You drove me to the polls just because I asked, and you're a nice person. You're not that person who's been demonized for the last 20 years on social media. You're just a regular Joe, and I didn't know that you were a Democrat. Cool. That's great. And you change that person's perception, maybe not about yourself, but also about the local Democratic Party and the state Democratic Party and the federal Democratic Party. Again, just proving to people that we're not what people think we are is helpful. And then, of course, the greatest thing that you can do is give somebody money If you can, that's awesome. Candidates always need money. They're never going to say no. But I always tell people even greater than money is making sure that you can volunteer. So find the candidate that you believe in. It doesn't have to be a federal candidate. It doesn't even have to be in our state. We would love for that to happen. We would love for you to stay local and work out with your state representative candidate or your state Senate candidate, because let's face it, they need a lot of help and they would love anybody who wants to get involved. But if you don't feel comfortable doing it locally, try to find one of these Senate campaigns that really, really need help in their state, in Maine, in Georgia, in Ohio, in Texas, in Alaska, North Carolina, in Minnesota, Michigan, New Hampshire. All of these campaigns need help. And you can write postcards from your kitchen table. They'll send you, sign up. They have online, they've got virtual phone banks. You can do phone banks through Zoom with other people from across the country. And all of this can be found out online. You just got to do a little bit of research, go to their campaign website, sign up to be a volunteer, and the campaign will reach out to you. They absolutely will, because they are always desperate for more people to get involved. So do something is really my advice. Anything you can think of. And again, if that's just cooking baking cookies, or making a potluck or a crock pot full of chili, that's awesome. That's great. It's going to help somebody out feel better about themselves and give them that extra little motivation to actually go out and do the thing that they believe in, which is try to get their candidate elected.
Absolutely. It takes all types of people to run the world. It takes all types of people to run a campaign.
Mm-hmm.
And there is always a job for someone, or you can do what I did. And I just made up something where I just put people online and I'm just like, here you go. Here's a platform that you can use. So, but getting involved, just showing up, like I think people get scared to get involved, and it's so easy. Just start by going to your local county Democrat meeting. It's super simple to get involved. They have them once a month. It's super easy. And also the thing about giving to politicians, they are not going to say no to any amount. If you only have $5, that is okay. They will gladly take it. No amount is too small. No amount is too big. But if you don't have money, like Dave said, you can volunteer and they will gladly accept your help. They need your help.
Yep.
Well, Dave, this has been a great conversation. Is there anything else you would like to leave the viewers with?
No, I'm available to be found wherever you can find me. Like I said at the beginning of the show, at the top of the hour, if you need my help and you want some advice, I'm always open to that conversation, and we'll always take a phone call. And there's no charge. It's just, if you feel like getting involved and you want to, and you're a Democrat looking for help, let me know. I'm more than happy to give advice and answers and any help I possibly can.
Well, thank you so much again. I really appreciate all of this great information, and I know the viewers do as well. So thank you everyone for joining us. Make sure to hit the subscribe button so you don't miss next week's episode, and I'll see you next time.